Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 89. I am your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan. If he can't do it, well, he'll just keep trying until he does it. And this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels all over the world. And don't forget the romance, because wooden boats are very romantic. Thanks for tuning in today. Great to have you on board. As you may know, this podcast is about getting in the wooden boat game one way or the other, enjoying wooden boats, building one, using one, admiring one, getting a wooden boat magazine, all those fun things. My job here is to educate, inspire, teach, and encourage you to do those things. So if I can help, shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. Today's featured segment is an interview with Jay Smith of Anacortes, Washington. Jay Smith is a master Nordic boat builder specializing in clinker or lapstrake construction, which is really a cool method of building a boat. Jay is building a 56-foot Viking ship in his backyard, which I talked about that when I interviewed Jay for episode number 7. So if you go back to hookedonwoodenboats.com/007, you can listen to the previous interview with Jay, where we talked about his personal history and how he got his training and quite a bit about the boat that he's building, the 56-foot Viking ship. In the interview today, Jay is going to be talking about a recent trip he made to Scotland, where he met a traditional wooden boat builder there on a little island, and also going to be talking about trunnels, which are wooden pins that are used to fasten planks the traditional way to frames on a wooden vessel. So it's cool stuff, so stick around. I think you're going to like it. So I'll throw a little update in here on my 12-foot lapstrake canoe. I put on 1 coat of varnish last week on top of the 5 coats I already had. I sanded very carefully the whole boat with 400 grit sandpaper, made sure there were no runs, spent probably 2 hours doing that and an hour putting on the varnish. It's not quite as good as I want. Surprise, surprise. Oh my goodness. I think you've got to be a rocket scientist to really get varnish to be 100% perfect. But the main issue I'm having is I'm getting a few dry spots. I think I mentioned this last week, where I'll varnish over a piece of wood, and I know I've varnished every spot. When it dries, though, there's a few spots that the varnish didn't really take, and I'm not sure what's going on. So I got to do a little more research, figure that out, because basically I think what I'm going to do is just put 1 more coat on the gunnels and the decks, leave the inside of the boat as it is, just put the seat in. I've got the paddle made, which is the Greenland-style paddle that I built for my skin-on-frame kayak that I still have that's carved out of cedar. So that'll be my paddle for the boat. So I'm really close, folks. I should be able to get it done this week because we've got some nice weather coming up the next few days. The exciting news is I drove to Port Townsend yesterday with my pickup and picked up my Scamp kit. So in case you don't know, a Scamp is an 11-foot, 11-inch micro cruiser. It's got a 5-foot, 4-inch beam, 175-pound water ballast, a balanced lug rig, a pram bow, lots of flotation, very safe and seaworthy boat, all in less than 12 feet long, which means in the state of Washington, you don't have to register it with the state, which is pretty cool. Anyway, I bought the kit, which is 74 pre-cut parts cut out of Akumi plywood. Now, I could have saved some money and cut the parts out myself, but it's a very complex cutout, and there's about 8 or 9 sheets of plywood involved. Plus, I bought the foils kit, which is a centerboard and rudder, which are cut out of 3/4 inch Akumi plywood. So the cuts are very complex. I know I could have done it. I could have laid it out and cut it out myself, but there's lots of bevels, lots of odd shapes. I'm guessing to do a really good job on the cutout would take me 80 to 120 hours. So the kit cost a fair amount more than buying the plywood and cutting it out yourself. But I decided that I wanted to get a 2 to 3 week head start on building this boat, so I went ahead and bought the kit. So I picked the kit up yesterday, stopped and did an interview with Arlie and Todd Blankenship, who built the Scamp last year. And then I stopped at the Northwest Maritime Center and saw some of my friends there and talked to some guys building Scamps there. Then I brought my kit home and unloaded it in the garage. Wow, there's a lot of parts. So I've been asking for tips from people. The tip that keeps coming up again and again, which would apply to basically any epoxy coated boat or epoxy built boat, is to don't use too much epoxy. Be very careful when you're building your fillets and applying your epoxy so you don't get too much, because you're going to end up sanding till the cows come home, whatever that means. Okay, so the deal is I'm going to incorporate into my website, hookedonwoodenboats.com, a page or 2 or 3 pages documenting the Scamp build process. And I'm going to try to make it very intuitive and easy to look at. So one page, and I'm just talking out loud here, this is going to be modified maybe a little bit, but this is what I'm thinking right now. One page, I'm going to keep track of all the costs to build the Scamp. That's a scary thing there. Second piece is going to keep track of all the hours building the Scamp, which that could get embarrassing because I know I'm not the fastest boat builder in the world. But I'm going to document the cost and the time. And then I'm thinking about doing a weekly update on my progress that would include what I've worked on the past week and have some photos and maybe even a short video each week talking about what I've done. As I've mentioned previously, my purpose in building this boat is to sell it and make a little bit of money. And I'll be real honest with you, I think it's going to cost me. What I'm going to do here is assemble the boat to basically assemble the kit and then attempt to sell it in that stage. So somebody purchasing it would supply their own spars and sail. They would put their own finish and hardware on the boat. They would rig it and do all those things. So I'm just going to build the boat that's assembled and epoxy coated. I'm thinking it's going to cost me between $3,000 and $3,500 to build the boat, and 200 to 250 hours of time. And I think when I'm done, the boat will be worth about $6,000. So if you do the math on all that, I think I'll be lucky if I make $10 an hour. But that's okay. I want to get this experience under my belt. I want to see if there's a market for a Scamp. If you're in the market, if you have an interest, just shoot me an email. I'd love to talk to you about it. So anyway, as soon as I get the Scamp pages up on my website, I'll give you that information so you can start tracking the progress if you'd like to. Hopefully that'll draw some interest. I would like to have a page also for tips on building the Scamp, and not just on building the Scamp, but on building wooden boats in general, because some tips will apply to all boats, not just the Scamp. For instance, the piece about being careful with the epoxy, not using too much, getting real clean fillets, taping off your fillets, all those things apply to all epoxy-built boats. So that's the Scamp plan. I'm pretty excited. I still got a little owie from my bicycle crash a couple of weeks ago, so I've got a finger taped up and I've got a sore rib still. So I've got to take it easy here the next couple of weeks, but hopefully I can get the building jig put together and get some parts together and get going on this thing. So I'm pretty excited, a little overwhelmed too. There's a lot of pieces, and I've got a manual that's 100 pages long that I'm going to be following. So, but it's going to be fun. I know I'm going to enjoy it. So stick around and check it out. Episode 100 is coming up soon for Hooked on Wooden Boats. If you have an idea for what you'd like to the content of the show to be on that 100th episode, shoot me an email, and I'll throw that in the hat with the other ones and try to pick the best one and let you know. We've got a couple new subscribers this week to the e-newsletter, Kevin Cavini and Arlie Blankenship. Thank you guys for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed to my newsletter, I would encourage you to do so. I send it out once a month via email. I talk about what's happening at Hooked on Wooden Boats, give you some resources and links. It's just kind of a fun way to connect. If you'd like to subscribe, go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. I think that's about it for the introduction. Thanks again for tuning in. We're going to turn it over to the interview with Jay Smith now in Anacortes, Washington. I sat down with Jay at his shop about 3 weeks ago to do this interview. So let's roll the tape. Take it away, guys. Before we roll the tape, I just want to insert a little comment here. First of all, we're sitting outside of Jay's shop. He's got chickens. There's planes flying over. So you're going to hear some things. The first part of the tape, I was going to edit it out because I started laughing with the chickens, but I just left it in. And the planes, you're going to hear a little bit of that. I edited most of it out, but anyway, just want to give you a heads up. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Okay. Let's start over. I'll edit that part now. The chickens are making me laugh.
Yeah, they'll talk at us. Yeah, of course.
Okay, it is May 5th, 2013. I am with Jay Smith at HOWB Boats. Jay, welcome to the podcast again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's good to be here. We last met, I was looking at my notes, September 20th, 2011. It's been a year and a half. I can't believe it.
Is that right?
Yeah. Very cool. So we're sitting outside of Jay's shop here. It's a beautiful northwest day, supposed to be 75 degrees today, which is pretty unusual for May. But it's a lot of fun stuff going on here at Jay's shop. But Jay, for people that didn't listen to the first interview, which was episode 7 of Hooked on Wooden Boats, maybe spend just a minute giving us your background in boats and your time in Norway and so on. But let's pause here and let this plane go over first. Okay, so we're back here with the planes going over. So Jay, just give us your brief bio, if you would.
Well, many years ago, when I was a young man in my mid-20s, I had spent some time in Norway as a student first, and then returned for an apprenticeship in wooden boat building to the west coast of Norway, and was really extremely fortunate to find small boat works where I could work with them, learn from them, and get to know those people and the language over a period of about a year and a half. And that was really the pearl from which all of this has grown. That was traditional lapstrake boat building, Western Norway, a little bit west and south of Trondheim. And the boat building was still a lot of hand work, a lot of hand tools, a lot of hard work, and beautiful boats. And many of the strong traditions from hundreds of years before were still being practiced. So I was fortunate to be exposed to that and learn from those people. And then several years later, realizing that I had not at all mastered the trade, but needed to learn more. I received a grant from Denmark to study the same traditional lapstrake boat building in Denmark, and so spent a year in the Faroe Islands learning even more about the history of lapstrake boat building and traditions and styles and methods and all of that. And so that really solidified lapstrake boat building in the Nordic tradition for me. And in the years following that, I came back to the States and built a lot of small boats and dabbled in anything in wooden boats, interiors and fish boat repairs and a little bit of this and that and everything. Continuing to build lapstrake boats all of these years. So that's how it all came about.
And the Nordic lapstrake boats, those are kind of your passion, sounds like.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, that's where your interest is. So in our last interview, we did talk about this Viking ship that you're building, which is 56 feet long, and one of the things you're using to fasten that with is trunnels. And let's spend a little bit of time talking about trunnels, Jay. Tell us what those are and how they're used and what the advantages are.
Trunnels go back, I'm sure, a couple of thousand years. It was a natural way to fasten planking to framing when iron was at a premium, very expensive, and wood was there for the taking. So we know that some of the real refinements in trunnel fastening happened in the Viking era. At least in that part of the world, we know that the process was perfected by the Vikings, and so we have examples of how they trunnel fastened their planking to framing. And what we've decided in this project is that would be the best way for us to do it as well. So we have experimented with a few different types of wood, and what we finally came upon was that we would be using Pacific Yew for trunnels in the large oak floor timbers and frames in the ship. And Pacific Yew is a very unique tree, very slow growing, but it has marvelous properties for this, which we quickly discovered, and that's why we chose it. It's a very dense wood. It has natural rot resistance. It is known for its flexibility and resilience. The more we researched it, the more we realized that, of course, it was highly prized in Europe, in England, for the longbow in medieval England. The English army had many successes because of their bowmen, their longbows, against the French, and most of the best of the longbows were made of yew. So it was very highly prized because of its strength and flexibility. And in this case, in our application, we want all of those properties. We want strength and flexibility and resilience, and the rot resistance, of course, is important in shipbuilding. So that was our decision, to go with Pacific Yew, and then we had to create the cutters to make the trunnels, and also all of the machining to bore for the trunnel through the plank, through the frame, and have a very, very tight, close fit consistently, consecutively, each time, reliably. And so it took a certain amount of machining to get that all fine-tuned. But once we did, we did some tests, and we were very pleased with what we had. And then the trunnels are wedge fastened inboard, which is the locking mechanism. And for that, we wanted something really tough and, again, rot resistant, and black locust was the perfect choice. So what we have is a combination of Pacific Yew for the trunnel. In this case, it's a 1-inch diameter trunnel with a shoulder or head, if you will, outboard to draw the plank against the frame. And then once everything's drawn together by the trunnel, the wedge is driven from inboard to lock it all tight. And then everything is sawn off and flushed out and oiled, impregnated with pine tar, linseed, and turpentine. And that's complete.
Okay, so essentially it's like just in layman's terms, if you took a 1-inch dowel and it had a head on one end of it, and you drilled and drove it through your plank and your frame, and on the other end you split it, and you drive a wedge into it, is that right? And then you saw it off flush with your frame?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the crux of the matter. In these dimensions, we have to saw a deep V into the trunnel to make way for the wedge.
I see. Yeah.
And then saw the wedge to certain length so that it will lock the trunnel in place, and there will be enough to saw off inboard and flush it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're actually sitting here looking at a prototype, which I'll take some pictures of and put up on the show notes for those of you that are listening. So, Jay, what kind of a machine how did you make these trunnels? Because they're about those are what, 8 to 10 or 12 inches long?
Yeah, we're starting with 12 to 13 inch blank stock, inch and a half square, 37 millimeters square, and then running that through a block with cutters, which reduces it to the 1 inch and to the 1 1/4 inch head, all in one throw in about 30 seconds.
Wow.
And then and so the cutters have to be really sharp, and the drive has to be the right speed, and we've set it up on a sloping bench so that we can comfortably stand and run and load it and run one trunnel and then back it out and do it rather quickly, because we have many trunnels to make. And then once we've got a finished trunnel, we have a test plank, which is bored just the same as the planking would be on the boat, and we test it to make sure that it's a good fit, because everything is really within 5/1000ths.
Wow.
Diameters for the bore and diameters for the shoulder and the shank. And we want a certain fit for the shoulder, of course. And we also want a very tight fit in the framing of the boat, which is what draws it all together. And so that has to also be very tight in the oak.
Is it a little bit looser through the planking itself, Jay? Or is it the same as in the frame?
Well, there are 3 different diameters here. We want it absolutely snug in the shoulder in the plank,
yeah,
but we don't want too much pressure through the plank itself. And then in the oak, we want quite a bit of pressure, a very tight fit, so that in the end it draws the plank against the frame. So there are more details than what meets the eye in the beginning of the whole process.
So you've got to drill the plank differently than the frame then?
Yeah.
Basically. So you drill the frame from the inside then? So you can get it the way you want it?
That's right. It's a several bore process, and we begin with a pilot from inboard, and then countersink from outboard, and then we open it up from inboard to the full 1 inch.
Yeah.
So it's a setup.
Yeah.
It's a setup and a process, and it's repetitive, but it has to be A, B, C, D, E each time in the right order.
In the process.
And you've got to have one fellow outboard and one inboard and all the gear, inboard and outboard, and backing hammers and driving hammers. And yeah, it's a little setup, but once everything's in place and we're ready to make trunnels, it's a good little show.
How many trunnels will go in this boat, this Viking boat, roughly?
Oh, we're probably looking at something like 800.
Oh, wow!
And we have 100 in.
Oh, you do?
And so I might be off by 10% there. I really haven't pickled it all out, but yeah.
What's the spacing on them in the frames?
There's a trunnel in each plank.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. I see. Very cool. So then the other thing we were going to talk about, Jay, was you recently, last fall, you made a trip over to Scotland, and you had the fine adventure of sitting down with the gentleman there in the islands that builds wooden boats. And so tell me about that experience.
Yes. About 6 months ago, my wife and I traveled to Western Scotland, to the Western Isles, and got out to the Isle of Skye, and then from Skye out to the Outer Hebrides, to the Isle of Harris and Lewis. And I had done a little bit of homework ahead of time to find and discovered that there's a boat builder living on Harris who's been building all his life, and he's sort of specialized in lapstrake, and so I couldn't resist looking him up. And although I didn't want to intrude, I was hoping I could spend a little bit of time with him and ask a few questions and just dig a little bit into what his life as a lapstrake boat builder has been like, and any little tidbits that he might have about it. And we were very fortunate to have a meeting with him. He was very cordial and welcoming, quite a gentleman. He is 73 now, so he's retired, but he has built many boats, and he welcomed us into his home one morning for a couple of hours, and we just basically talked about wooden boats and the history and the evolution and planking and framing and materials and pine tar and linseed and caulking and wool and oakum and the whole gamut. Just what was used in what styles and what periods, and how did that come about, and what were the scarcities, because out in the Outer Hebrides that they don't have much. They don't have any wood, for one thing. There are no forests, so the wood has to be imported. Most things have to be imported. The rivets have to be imported. So the discussion quickly went to back to the time of the Vikings, when the Vikings came down from western Norway to Orkney and Shetland and Orkney, and then to the Hebrides and the Isle of Skye, and they came in and they settled and became part of the culture. And when they did so, they brought with them their shipbuilding technology, of course, and expertise. And so that heavily influenced the boat building that had been there prior to that period. And so that was pretty fascinating, because I asked if the Vikings invaded the Hebrides, and his response was, "We hosted the Vikings."
It's all in your perspective, right?
And I thought that was a charming way to put it.
Yeah.
In other words, what I believe he was saying was those people brought with them great expertise, valued expertise and knowledge. And the people living in the Hebrides recognized that these people were knowledgeable. and that they needed to be welcomed as a part of the community, and so they became Scottish, essentially, those who stayed. And for a couple of hundred years, of course, there was a language, maybe language barrier or assimilation that occurred, and the Norse language left many, many terms which still exist in the Hebrides. There's a long list of Nordic place names and terminology in boat building which comes right out of Norway, essentially. So this interview with John Macaulay is his name, and remember, he was quick to correct me. I mispronounced his name at first and thought it was Macaulay, and he said Macaulay, and that's son of Olaf.
Oh.
Or Olafson.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So right away, there's this Scandinavian connection because his name means Olafson.
Interesting.
Macaulay.
Yeah. So what kind of boats is he building there, Jay?
In the islands there, they import the planking from Scotland these days. Not so many hundreds of years ago, most of the materials came from Norway for boat building because that was the traffic. And they had strong connections back to Norway, and there were marvelous forests with lots of boat building going on in Norway, so it was an automatic for them to import from Norway. A lot of boat traffic and travel past them to Dublin and back. But in the last 100 years, it's become Scottish trade with the mainland, and so what grows in Scotland is larch, and so he's planking in larch and using oak for stems and keel and copper rivets and natural finish. So they're beautiful, bright, varnished boats. The planking is taken from narrower stock than what we're accustomed to in Norway, so there are more strakes than Norwegian boats. Maybe 9 strakes in one of his 17-footers, as opposed to 4 or 5, 5 or 7 in Norway, where planking is wider and material is more accessible.
So what would be the functional difference of having a boat that's planked narrower versus wider like that, Jay? Just curious.
Well, there's more labor involved in building it. More fitting, more laps, more rivets.
A little stiffer boat, maybe?
A little bit stiffer and a little bit heavier, I might venture to say.
Yeah.
Not a great degree, but just because of more rivets, more laps, it will be a heavier boat. And I don't think that that's a detriment, because they are using these boats in what they call the Minch, which is the body of water between the Outer Hebrides and Western Scotland, and it can get pretty stinky out there.
Oh.
There are a lot of channels and currents and winds, fighting currents. A lot of water moves through the Minch, and so fishing out there was tricky. And to have boats that are built for that was, of course, extremely important.
Yeah.
So as with fisheries around the world, the boats are always built to succeed in the fishery that's at hand. And in some fisheries that there aren't great demands put on them, it's more protected, maybe not so treacherous, but this is one that's a pretty mean stretch of water, or can be.
Are people still using those boats to fish over there, you think, Jay?
Less and less. Unfortunately, the wooden boat building tradition is dying, and young people aren't really stepping up to it.
Yeah.
as a career. So there are fewer and fewer wooden boats, many old ones, of course, still, but the modern age moves on.
That's where you and I come in. We're trying to flame the fire, right?
Well, we hope it doesn't die.
Stoke the fire.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly.
We hope that they'll be found not only in museums, but in use.
When we're gone, there'll still be a few people around using and enjoying wooden boats. I get the sense that we're on a little upswing there, just from what I do. Getting out and meeting, talking to people.
Well, I think there will always be a very, very small slice of humanity that appreciates what it is for what it is, and the beauty and the history and what a pleasure it is to be on the water in a wooden boat. And it's not the same as being in any other boat that is not wood. It's a different experience. But I think we have to be a bit romantic and appreciate history and all of the evolution that has occurred in wooden boat building over thousands of years, not just 1,000, but 10,000.
Yeah, right. So do you get out on the water yourself, Jay, at all?
Very seldom.
Really? Yeah.
Very seldom. A little bit, but I'm not anywhere near as much a sailor as I am a builder.
Yeah, your passion is really building.
Yeah.
But you live here on Lake Erie. You've got a little pram down there you take out once in a while?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Got a sail on it?
No, not
No
on
sail.
prams.
Okay.
No, it's really just for
a rowing pram.
a little rowing picnic here and there.
Yeah, very cool. So Jay, for people listening, maybe just tell us what you do and services you offer if somebody might be interested, and give us your contact information.
Oh, geez.
I'd like to give you some business today.
I build wooden boats.
Okay.
Anything wood on boats. I think I've probably been exposed to most all of it over the last 34 years, and so it's always a great challenge to have someone come to me with an idea, and then for us to sculpt that idea into reality and design something, or find a design and maybe modify it a little bit to meet their needs, and then begin building. So it is, in all senses of the word, it's custom work. And it's great fun. And in almost every case, we come up with something that is nearly perfectly suited to the person's needs, and something that outlives us all.
Yeah. And your niche is Nordic or Clinker boat building, as we mentioned earlier. Would you say that?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
Yeah.
And how about your contact information, Jay? Phone number, the best way to get a hold of you?
Oh, the easiest, because I keep a phone in the shop all the time, is here in Anacortes, Washington, 360-293-2034. And I do have an email, but I don't check it often enough, so phone is the
best way.
Most expedient way.
Okay, very good.
Yep.
Any parting comments you'd like to make for our listeners today?
Well, I just think it's terrific what Dan's doing here, pumping up the interest in wooden boats and keeping the fires lit, and giving those of us who work in this genre an opportunity to explain what we do and why we do it, get it out, get the word out. So I really appreciate your efforts.
Thank you. All right. Well, thanks for taking time today to do this, Jay. I really appreciate it. And best to you in the future.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks. Thanks for taking the time for the interview, Jay. It was fun, as always, to meet and see what you're up to. And the Trunnels stuff you're doing is really fascinating. That is so cool. What a great way to fasten boats together. I just think it's awesome. We're going to wrap it up here in a minute. I would love it if you would connect with me, Dan, at hookedonwoodenboats.com, or subscribe to my newsletter by going to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. You can leave comments on my website each week when I publish the audio podcast. I also write up a blog post and have pictures on there that you can check out. You can write comments there. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest if you look for Wooden Boat Dan. I would also appreciate it if you enjoy the podcast to go to iTunes and look up Hooked on Wooden Boats in the podcast section and give me a 5-star review there. I would really appreciate that. Kind of keeps bringing me up closer to the top of the heap so that more people learn about the podcast. And that's always cool. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/Amazon. Make any purchase from Amazon, I get paid a small commission. And I've also got a page on my website called Gear where you can buy t-shirts and hats and that sort of thing with the Hooked on Wooden Boats logo. So it's all good stuff. The main thing, though, folks, is to get in the wooden boat game one way or the other. I've got lots of ideas on how to do it. If you want to connect or just listen to the podcast, you can get ideas that way, or buy a Wooden Boat magazine, or go out in a wooden rowboat. You get my drift there, folks. So have a great week. God bless. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan, over and out.